Welcome to our show, Polygamy, What Love Is This? I am your host, Doris Hanson, and it's certainly a privilege to be invited into your homes tonight. We do trust that you will enjoy what we have planned for you tonight on the show, and we certainly know that the content is going to be controversial, especially tonight, as it usually is. If you have friends or relatives in the Nampa, Idaho area, you might want to tell them that they can watch our show on Sunday afternoons from 4 until 5 p.m. You might want to call them and tell them they can tune in on that night. And we do broadcast live from Salt Lake City, Utah. This is a telephone call-in program. Our telephone number is 801-973-TV20, 801-973-8820. If you would prefer to email us your questions or comments, you can send your email to tv@aboutpolygamy.com. Or if you prefer, you can go on the internet also and watch all of our previous shows on streaming video. Our website is tv@aboutpolygamy.com. Whoops, our website is whatloveisthis.tv. I got confused. And of course, that's where all of our previous shows are at. And from that website, you'll be able to find information about our show and about what we do. There's also a support group. It's called Life After Polygamy. We meet once a month, and we did meet again last Monday night, and our next meeting is going to be Monday night, September 20th at 6:30 p.m. If your life has been touched by polygamy in any way, even if your grandparents were polygamists and you just like to come and talk about it and hear other people talk about it, come on down, let us know, and we'll give you the details. And you can also go to shieldandrefuge.org for information about our ministry to polygamists. We have a DVD, Lifting the Veil of Polygamy. We have a book entitled, Is Polygamy Biblical? And you can find out how to receive those resources free. There's various articles on that website that you can download and read, and you can also link to some wonderful websites from shieldandrefuge.org. If you're in a polygamy group and you need help, or you just need questions asked, or if you just say, there's got to be a better way, there is a better way. And that's why we're here. We want to help you. We want to talk about it. So give us a call. We have a toll-free number, especially for you. It's a hotline number, and it's 877-425-9993. So give us a call. I'd like to remind you about the Adams Road Band that's coming on September 17th to perform a benefit concert for our ministry to the polygamists. We'd love to have you come. We'd love to have you grab 10 people and bring them along and pray for this, and also just be blessed as you listen to them sing. They perform inspiring, God-centered Christian music, so please be sure that you put it on your calendar, 7 p.m., September 17th. That's a Friday evening. It's hosted by Mill Creek Baptist Church, and the address is 1515 East, 4500 South. That's in the Holiday area of Salt Lake City, and we do hope that you will come and bring your friends. We know that you'll enjoy the evening. You know, we are keenly aware that this culture has little respect for biblical authority. Nevertheless, we continue and will continue to rely upon biblical authority for our show in obedience to God's Word. You know, God promised, and I've mentioned this on the show continuously and will in the future as well, He promised to preserve His Word, and we stand on that promise. But the Mormons and the polygamists have historically refused to believe that God kept His promise, and they have rejected the biblical integrity and authority. However, interesting developments are taking place from the LDS church members these days. It might interest you to know that Newspeak has reared its ugly head again. Some of them are now saying that they do believe the Bible because it was written by them. I read on a blog recently that one of the Mormons penned, and he said that it was the Mormons who penned the New Testament. And Gary Lawrence, who recently spoke at the Fair Conference, is quoted as saying, to the assertion that Mormons don't believe the Bible, Lawrence suggested this response: of course we believe the Bible. Our members wrote it. Now, in context, what they're saying is that they are Christians and Christians wrote the Bible, so they wrote it. Well, they've got it way wrong, because the Jews wrote the Old Testament. Christians didn't write the Old Testament. They didn't even exist then. And the Mormons have proven that they are not Christian, but they have never proven that they are Christian. So now they're claiming that the Bible is true. God can't guarantee that it's true, but they can. What kind of shameful trickery is this? We wonder if they're going to make their changes in the Articles of Faith. And of course it begs the question, is it the King James Version, or is it Joseph Smith's version that they want to claim they wrote? By the way, the Joseph Smith version is not even a translation. It's a rewrite, and it's riddled with flaws, and that's putting it gently. Tonight, there are two biblical principles to discuss before we introduce our guest. The first one is, God has prohibited necromancy, which describes activity with the dead. Second, He has commanded against working on endless genealogies. You can see 1 Timothy 1:4 and Titus 3:9 for those scriptures. And there are no exceptions listed. And you need to know that those verses forbidding genealogy remain completely unchanged in the Joseph Smith rewrite version of his Bible. And the multiple verses in the Bible that forbid necromancy, necromancy includes sorcery, consulting with mediums and spiritists and spirit guides and psychics, any communication of any kind with spirits of the dead or the spirit world. All this describes necromancy and is prohibited. And there are no exceptions. Now, in the version, the Joseph Smith rewrite version, he has also left all those many verses prohibiting necromancy, he's left them untouched as well. So in the process of rewriting the Bible, Joseph Smith had every opportunity to fix those verses if he perceived that they were in error, but he didn't. And so the conclusion is obvious. Those verses stand as written. Don't do it. Members of the LDS Church spend millions of dollars and multiple millions of hours acquiring genealogical information and then performing various temple rituals and baptisms for those dead ones. It's terribly troubling that they're performing the work for the people who never wanted it while they were here, and they are sealing people to each other, multiple women to men, and multiple husbands to individual women, and worst of it is, God has said, don't do that, but they're doing it. Our guest tonight is a Salt Lake City-based researcher. She researches into these practices of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It was her groundbreaking research that revealed that the LDS Church was continuing to posthumously baptize victims of the Holocaust, which sparked a great deal of outrage in recent years. I'd like to introduce and welcome to our show tonight, Helen Radkey.
It's a pleasure to be here, Doris. Thank you so much for asking me.
And it's a pleasure to have you, and you've put a lot of work into research for this show alone.
Yes.
And I just really appreciate what she does, quality work, I'm telling you. Is there anything that you'd like to add about yourself or your work?
I've been researching proxy baptisms for about 17 years. And what led me into the research for Mormon fundamentalists was finding two posthumous baptisms for Orville LeBaron, the killer of the LeBaron clan, and that my curiosity was stimulated when I found these records for Orville LeBaron, and so I started researching other Mormon fundamentalists in the databases that the LDS Church has, where it has the ordinances recorded, and I was astounded at what I found, and doing the research for this show has just totally blown me away.
Whoa.
I mean, it's like the LDS Church has not missed a beat when it comes to Mormon fundamentalists bringing them back in the fold once they are deceased.
Once they're deceased.
And then some.
Yeah.
I have never seen anything like it.
And of course, it takes several shows to get through all the information, but so we'll see what we can do. You know, we get some blistering responses from our viewers, some of our viewers, both defending early Mormon polygamy, and then out of the other side of their mouth, they're condemning today's polygamists. Some of them will vehemently insist that since the Manifesto of 1890, they have no connection whatsoever to polygamy. But the LDS Church continues to insist that it's not doctrinal, and they do excommunicate living known members who practice polygamy. So tonight what we're going to do is discuss some of this research that you've done to uncover some of this information that has shocked you so about Mormons and polygamy, which proves that polygamy is a present doctrine, and that by these practices the LDS Church are systematically endorsing polygamy in mass, and that polygamy is alive and well and prospering in Mormon temples on planet Earth.
That's correct.
And with that in mind, let's look at some of what you've done. Let's start with Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith, what you've discovered about them.
Well, it's commonly thought, as far as I understand it, that Joseph Smith had somewhere between 33 and 37 wives, but in the Mormon databases, specifically New Family Search, which is the database that has the records of posthumous ordinances, we have hundreds of spouses listed for Joseph Smith. And one record alone shows 186 individual women with completed sealings to Joseph Smith.
Wow.
And I've added up the names, and roughly 239 spouses for Smith, and many of these sealings were done in Endowment House here in, which used to be in Salt Lake City on Temple Square, after Smith's death.
Yeah.
And so it looks like wives galore have been added to his tally.
To his heavenly harem, huh?
His heavenly harem, and also conversely for his brother Hiram, who was known to have 6 wives when he was alive. We're looking at roughly 68 wives for Hiram. Also, there's another thing too that's very peculiar about the Mormons. It's this endless baptizing. Joseph Smith was posthumously baptized in 2008 and 2009.
He was.
And even with the posthumous marriage sealings, I have copies of several that were done in 2010. And they've done in recent years. These are probably duplicates, sealings to 19th century spouses, but nevertheless there's this incessant
Why would
continuing.
They continue to baptize
I
them?
do not know. Even with a database that is supposedly tighter security-wise, this still goes on. Of course, we don't know how old these records are, how long they've been in the Mormon temple system, but there's still activity for Joseph Smith. But it's an incredible number of women that that he's been sealed to, and also there are many records that show unknown name as spouses for Smith, and I haven't counted those.
No, you haven't counted those.
I've only counted the ones that are have a name. So that's the thing. Now, can we look at Emma Smith?
You bet. Let's take her out next.
Poor Emma. One has to feel compassion for that dear lady, because she not only had to deal with Joseph Smith and his activities involving other women
While she was living,
and she was very outspoken as far as and even campaigned against polygamy, and yet she has been sealed to 3 men, it looks like, or 3 spouses are named in New Family Search. So we have Joseph Smith and his hundreds of spouses, and then we have Don Carlos Smith. Don Carlos was the youngest brother of Joseph Smith, and he died aged 25. And so we have him named, but but there's no specific information on
But
the seal.
he's named as a husband to Emma?
He's named as a husband to Emma. And then we have Louis Bidamon, who was Emma's second husband, legitimate husband, after Joseph Smith was killed. So we've got this very peculiar situation where Emma Smith is listed with 3 men as spouses, and to make it even more convoluted, although Don Carlos Smith died in 1841, which is fairly early in the piece, he died of malaria, he's listed in New Family Search with 8 spouses, including Emma Smith. And then Louis Bidamon, Emma's second husband, he's listed in New Family Search with 7 spouses. And the thing that's incredible about Louis was not a Mormon.
Yeah.
He did not believe in Joseph Smith. He said he was a false prophet. And so he fathered children out of wedlock. There was a couple of marriages there before. There were a couple of marriages there before he was married to Emma, and so it's fairly common for Mormons to seal couples who have children, whether they were married or not. And I was saying that they seal people, to their hanky-panky, affairs, mistresses, concubines. I mean, you name it, it can happen. So anyway, Louis, he whether he likes it or not, he's been sealed to 7 spouses, including Emma. Now, he was sealed to Emma Hale Smith, on the 11th of September 2009 in the St. George, Utah temple. So that's a fairly recent recent sealing. So I wanted to mention Emma Smith because it's not known all that well about women being sealed to multiple husbands.
Well, I think the interesting about Emma is that she despised polygamy. She refused to go west with Brigham Young and all the polygamists. She stayed back east. She refused to acknowledge that polygamy was ever practiced or by Joseph Smith. She refused to allow it to be in the new church that she and her son began there in Missouri. She refused to acknowledge Section 132 of the Doctrine and Covenants, which was this polygamy doctrine. And now they've done and sealed her to 3 men.
As far as we know, she's been sealed to Don Carlos, but the records are not available, but nevertheless he's listed as a spouse.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's significant here. The LDS Church, for people who don't know, New Family Search does need a login to access, and then within that system you may have ordinance information blocked. It can be blocked because it's controversial, because it's embarrassing to the church, but if ordinances have not been completed on a specific record for an individual, it can also block the temples from continuing to do inappropriate ordinances. So there are many reasons. It doesn't always mean the church is trying to hide information, but more often than not it is. And so sometimes when mistakes happen and they will say, oops, and there's a block, but the mere fact that Don Carlos Smith is listed as a spouse indicates that, well, that's on Emma's record.
Well, it's certainly suspicious, to say the very least. Yes. Very suspicious of what they're doing and why in the world they're doing it.
We could go on a long time about early Mormons and polygamy, but I strongly suspect that many other well-known early Mormons have been sealed to multiple women after they died.
Well, and it sounds like they even seal multiple women and multiple men to women as well. You've got some extremely information about Harold B. Lee.
Yes.
Would you like to talk about that?
Harold B. Lee is very, very interesting case. He was the LDS Church president from 1972 to 1973. Now, apparently, Harold B. Lee was committed to the principle of polygamy and the idea of its continuation on the other side, because in 1938, while his first wife, Fern Tanner Lee, was still alive, Harold B. Lee was sealed to a deceased woman. So
while his wife was living,
yes.
he was sealed to her.
And the deceased woman was an acquaintance. He was not married to her when she was alive, and her name was Frida Eleanor Johnson. So Harold B. Lee has been sealed to 3 women in the Salt Lake Temple. So he was sealed to his first wife in 1923, and he was sealed to Frida Eleanor Johnson in 1938, and then after his first wife died in 1962, he was sealed to Frida Joan Jensen on June 17, 1963.
Now explain to our viewers what this is on the screen that you have.
That's a New Family Search record. It's like a tree of Harold B. Lee's spouses. And in color, it would show where it says President Harold Bingham Lee, that's blue, and underneath it has his spouses. So the one that's highlighted there is Frida Eleanor Johnson.
And this is the original that you got from the church records.
That has been downloaded straight from New Family Search, and that's a very recent copy. Now, Frida Eleanor Johnson was a young woman who died of tuberculosis, and she was not married to Harold B. Lee when she was alive, but he was sealed to her. Where it says other spouses, Fern Lucinda Tanner, when Fern was still alive, he was sealed to Frida Eleanor Johnson. Now, Frida Eleanor Johnson is not to be confused with Frida Johanna Jensen. The last name there, she is a separate individual.
The second marriage.
The thing that's interesting is LDS records, you will be hard-pressed to find in biographies, in databases, anything with public access, you will not find that information. Some of this you have to really dig deep to dig up. So it's very peculiar. The other point to mention there was in 1933, the first presidency issued an official statement through J. Reuben Clark in June of that year against polygamy, and celestial marriage was defined as monogamy.
It was redefined.
It was redefined,
polygamy
and
to monogamy.
so you have Harold B. Lee being sealed to a deceased woman while his first wife was still alive. 5 years later, roughly 5 years later.
So they do believe in polygamy in the hereafter, and they're practicing it in the temples by all their temple work every day.
Yes, and he was president of the LDS Church, not at the time of the sealing, but he did become that.
Right. Okay, let's go on to the information where there's no end to the depths of what we could talk about, and that is the contemporary polygamists that are dead. They've been baptized and sealed to their polygamous spouses after they had been officially excommunicated from the LDS Church because they practiced polygamy.
That's correct. I've looked at more than 24 contemporary polygamists, and their names are back in the Mormon system. There's some common peculiarities. Just want to mention those quickly. Many of them show up in the Mormon system with their original baptism date. By original baptism date, that usually is when they were roughly 8 years old. So you have polygamists like Roland Allred, Charles Zitting, John Yates Barlow, and it will show up as the original baptism date, which has me puzzled because these were men who were excommunicated, and there are many of them with original baptism dates. And then you have posthumous baptisms done as well for these men. And there's so many of it, and it's such a hodgepodge, it's hard to know, how many, trying to tabulate and count all the figures, because most of them, I would have to say, in the majority of cases, many of the plural wives are listed again in the LDS files, again, ordinance records specifically, showing original marriage sealings, additional marriage sealings. It goes on and on and on and on. So I decided to look at Rulon Timpson Jeffs because he's so very well known as the dad of Warren Jeffs, who's been in the news so much lately.
Right, a high-profile figure there.
And Rulon died as recently as 2002, and he was and nearly all of these fundamentalists I'm talking about at his age level were excommunicated.
In that time.
Were excommunicated from the LDS Church for polygamy.
Right.
Almost all of the fundamentalists on my list were excommunicated because of polygamy, including Rulon. The other thing that's peculiar and that's common in the research, which is a little bit odd, is that the polygamists who were divorced from their first wives, that was very common. First wife said, "I've had enough of you. I'm not going to put up with this, and I'm going to divorce you," and they did. And Rulon Jeffs was one. His wife, Zola Brown, she wouldn't put up with polygamy, and so they were divorced. They all get sealed.
They all be sealed.
They seal. I mean, Rulon Allred, Charles Ditting. There's a whole slew. Ervil LeBaron, divorced from their first wife, and yet they're sealed to them. So
we have another there on Rulon Jeffs.
Now, Rulon Jeffs, I don't think it's known how many wives he had, and many of them may still be alive, including the mother of Warren Jeffs, Marilyn Steed Jeffs. So, but currently, this is taken from New Family Search current list of wives for Rulon. So we have 4.
Which they've done the temple work for these wives for him to reestablish him into polygamy, right?
Well, again, the records show marriage sealing ordinances not available, but they are listed as his spouses. And notice where it says Elba Woolley, up there in the box, the marriage box, it says plural marriage. So this is taken directly from LDS files.
Yeah.
Plural marriage, and you have 4 women listed as spouses for Rulon.
Yeah.
Now,
my goodness.
Going back one generation, we have David William Jeffs. I have not seen a picture of him, but that's the grandfather of Warren Jeffs.
That would be Rulon Jeffs' father, right?
Yes, Rulon Jeffs' father. Now, David Jeffs was rebaptized in April 1999 and sealed to Nettie Lenora Timpson in May 1999. Now, these were the grandparents, direct grandparents of Warren Jeffs. So, and also, David Jeffs has 2 wives listed in the Mormon system. So, again, we've got 2, we have polygamy recognized. So, you have Warren Jeffs, the LDS Church was nothing to do with Warren Jeffs, and yet you've got his dad and grandparents, and you've got polygamous unions recognized, listed in the Mormon system.
Right.
And
it's ludicrous.
And also you've got additional marriage sealings done, and this is common throughout my research for the 24 Mormon polygamists, Mormon fundamentalists. You have sealings galore. You have original sealings. You've got original baptisms. And the other thing that's very peculiar, and I'm going to take this directly from rules, LDS rules, first presidency approval is required before temple ordinances may be performed for deceased persons in some circumstances. And so one of the categories that requires first presidency approval are members who advocated or entered into plural marriage after the time of the manifesto in 1890. So supposedly...
So they know about this, or supposedly know about all of these.
But we don't,
and had to give their permission.
We don't know. So you have dozens and dozens of entries for Mormon fundamentalists showing up, new entries.
According to their rules, they would know.
According to their rules. I mean, it's so oddball. You'd have Rulon Allred with an original baptism date, and then you'd have one of his posthumous baptisms, I think was as recent as January 2009.
Wow.
I found a sealing for him later that year. I mean, it is just, there doesn't seem to be any restrictions at all on these names. So
okay, let me right now mention that we're going to open up our phone lines. We're half past now. Our phone number is 801-973-TV20, 801-973-8820. We do accept your comments, but remember, any rude phone calls will hang up on you immediately. And if someone does not allow a two-way dialogue, or in this case maybe three-way dialogue, we will also disconnect you. Helen, you have some information that you have dug, or that you have researched and found on Orville LeBaron, like you mentioned, that just kind of propelled you to begin on this. Orville LeBaron was a blood atoner, active polygamist, big on the United Order, the whole bit. Everything Joseph Smith taught, he believed and went for it big time. What would you like to share us tonight about that?
There's a couple of points about Orville. I met his brother Ross LeBaron here in Salt Lake City around the time I moved here, 1983-84. Ross told me that his brother Orville was possessed by demons. There was mental illness throughout the family.
Yes, that's true.
But Orville was a modern day Cain. He killed at least one of his brothers, Joel, and he was responsible for the deaths of 30-odd people. And he was convicted of ordering the death of Roland Allred here in Salt Lake City. And the extraordinary thing about Orville, in spite of his notoriety and his murderous history, he has been, I believe he was posthumously baptized in 2004 and 2005, and he's listed in New Family Search as ready to be rebaptized again. And he was sealed by proxy to his first wife, Delphina Salido, in 2002, although they'd been divorced in 1966, and Delphina had fled from Orville after the murder of Roland Allred. I believe she still lived there after their divorce. But I mean, it gets to the point where some of these sealings have to be questioned. So that was the thing that opened up my interest in the research on Mormon fundamentalists, and the entire LeBaron clan were excommunicated from the LDS Church. I believe Orville was excommunicated in 1944 because he openly defied LDS authority.
Right.
So that
I remember reading an article about Verlin LeBaron. Of course, we know one of his previous wives too. She's been on the show a couple of times. But he was, when he discovered that one of his wives, who was pregnant, had the doctor discovered that he was a polygamist, he was really upset because he knew he'd get excommunicated from the church for being discovered to be a polygamist, and that's what happened. But they wanted to have one foot in the church and one foot in polygamy and have the best of both worlds. Well, they're getting it in eternity, aren't they? The way the Mormons believe, anyway.
Yes. Now, possibly too, in the case of Orville LeBaron, as in the case of someone like Ted Bundy, who's also been posthumously rebaptized, but was not a polygamist, but was a serial killer. Mormons may say, well, the posthumous temple work is provisional. However, when multiple wives are listed, as multiple wives are listed on Orville LeBaron's record too, Mormon record, one has to question why are these type of records being kept, and you know, when there's any sealings that go on for someone, marriage sealings for someone like Orville LeBaron, plus numerous baptisms, it has to be asked what's going on here.
Absolutely, what is going on here? Well, we've got 3 callers that have some questions for us, so let's take a breather and take some phone calls.
Okay.
Line 1, we have Karen in Ogden. Hello, Karen.
Hello?
Oh, excuse me, I lied. Dan in Ogden.
Yeah, this is Dan.
Oh, hi, Dan. How are you?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're a little light, but is your TV turned down?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Okay. what I wanted to know, I called some months ago, but it was the end of your program and you couldn't answer my question. And it's sort of along the line that you're talking. I have a friend who has been approached by an elderly gentleman. He is up in Brigham City, and he wanted to make her a spiritual wife. She was in sort of hard times, and she's young, and he says he'll take care of her if she would agree to be his wife. So what I wanted to know is this a similar polygamy but going on in heaven with these people? Is this something that goes on all the time?
Dan, there really is no polygamy in heaven. They do believe that's what's going on, and that's why they're doing some of this work. But they don't, there is no marriage in heaven. Jesus told us there was no marriage in heaven. Therefore, we know that that it is just as impossible for people to be married when they die. Romans tells us that the marriage covenant is broken at death, and therefore they say that's why you have to be sealed eternally. No, because Jesus said there was no eternal marriages. But yes, that's what they believe is going on in heaven.
So this is something that young, impressionable women particularly ought to be aware of.
Yes.
And not be sucked into that.
That's one reason. That's one reason we
thinking.
do the show, is we want to inform and get people aware of some of the stuff that's going on. They claim that.
I found it disturbing that, you know, he sort of wiggled his way in and was like a good friend, like a grandfather, but then all of a sudden he popped the question, and she was considering it because she was in pretty dire straits, and I told her, don't you even
Good for you.
dare to do that.
Good for you. And the question I would have...
So, I didn't know if that was a one-time thing or something that's going on all the time.
No, it goes on quite frequently, probably more than we would be comfortable knowing. But one thing that I would have to say is, why does the man have to marry her to help her? Why can't he just have a big heart and just help her without tying her up to some kind of marriage?
Yeah, exactly. And on that subject of the LeBaron, I had a good friend that married into that group as I was growing up, and a young adult. She disappeared into Mexico. Never seen her since. But,
really? That's
so
typical.
Being raised in Utah all my life, watching all of this, I'm amazed that all this stuff is sort of still hidden. It ought to be, you guys are doing a good job at trying to make people aware. But
well, we thank you, Dan. But the Mormon Church it started on secrecy and deceit, and it continues the same way. Secrecy, bury everything, and show a good face. Don't let everything be seen and known. So anyway, thanks, Dan, for calling.
Thank you.
Good night. Okay, we have line 2, Karen in Ogden. Hello, Karen.
Hi, Doris. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. I wanted to bring up a question. I was born and raised in Mormonism.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Karen.
My membership retired.
Karen? Karen, I can't hear you. Would you speak up a little louder?
Yes, I was born and raised in Mormonism.
Uh-huh.
I have recently asked to have my membership retired. One of the reasons that I wanted to leave was I didn't believe it was a biblical church. And the second reason I wanted to leave was I don't believe in ancestor worship. And I believe that's exactly what the LDS Church does. It worships the pioneers. It worships their genealogy. And I got tired of worshiping the pioneers. I'm sorry. Sure, they may face great hardship for their religion, but they made that decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. That's true, Karen. And I've mentioned that a few times myself, that it is, in a sense, a form of ancestor worship. Look at all they're doing there. All for their ancestors, the people who have died.
I don't know that I'd take it as far as saying it's worship, but it's almost like an addictive practice, though, of wanting to join the bloodlines, you know, the generations. And because Mormons are mandated to do this, a guilt trip is put on them if they don't do it. And so you have this this passion for this work. But I have to say, in 17 years of research, that if Mormons just did their ancestors and focused on their ancestors, that would be one thing. But they are intent on saving the world. The dead must be offered salvation.
Must be baptized
and
for the
so
dead.
they are going after everybody who ever lived, and that is where you have such a huge muddle of records, and you have inappropriate names going in.
And the work done multiple times
and
for the same person.
And the work done multiple times.
Yeah. Does that help you, Karen?
It does.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Doris.
Thank you for calling, Karen. Good night. Okay, line 3, Diana in Sandy. Hello, Diana.
Hi there, Doris. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm have a question for Helen Radkey. And my question is this: I have a son that passed away 3 years ago, and I'm a believer. And I have my firstborn son is LDS, and he is intent on doing a baptism for his dead brother. Now, as a believer, I know that that doesn't take, but I find it totally disrespectful. And so I was wondering, Helen, if you have found, if there is a way to alert the LDS Church that I don't want this done. And I'll get off the phone and let you answer this.
Thank you, Diana.
Diana, there's really no way that you can prevent the LDS Church from performing the baptism. However, I would speak up and make your feelings known. One of the problems that we face today with the LDS Church is that as time has gone on, it is now hiding all traces of whatever baptisms for dead people are ongoing. And so there's simply, you wouldn't be able to find out unless you're able to log into their database whether the baptism actually occurs. But I would make your opinion very, very well known. And
where would she go to make that known to where it might be more effective?
You know, the names put into a huge system. You could try contacting the Family History Library. I'm not their favorite person, so I don't have any direct contact information, but you could start calling the church. But you really can't prevent them from doing a baptism, especially if there are Mormons involved, and especially if they're baptizing direct kinfolk.
What if it was a child, let's say 7 years old?
The child would not be baptized. Under 8, there are no baptisms.
How about 9 years old?
9 years old, there would be a baptism.
They wouldn't have to get the parents' permission to baptize a young child like that?
The next of kin is supposed to give permission, the closest kin.
If the child had died.
If the child had died and the parents are alive, then the parents' permission is supposed to be given. However, you have Mormons breaking the rules continuously on this type of situation.
Yeah. We know that. We're going to talk about that next time. Okay, line 2, we have Cherry from Wyoming. Hello, Cherry.
Hello.
Yes, you're on the air.
Hi.
Hi, what's your question?
I just was wanting to talk to you about how you was talking earlier about the whole secrecy, the LDS and the fundamentalists. Well, I actually grew up, my mother was Catholic and my father was LDS, and so I was really LDS, and when I got older, a best friend of mine who was also LDS, she ended up getting pregnant. And you know, you're supposed to go to the bishop and talk to him about these things. And he told her that she was supposed to get an abortion or was to leave her church, or to leave his church.
Really?
And it just broke her heart because, you know, we looked up and it was just wonderful. And we were, you know, the church camp. We had all our little young woman medallions. We had that memorized. We was just like, our whole world revolved around this church, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And close that door, buddy. Sorry. And it was just awful. And then once I got a little bit older, I ended up getting pregnant too. I was a little young, and I just decided, you know what, I'm going to leave because I don't want it to happen to me too. And, you know, I just thought, well, why would any type of religion at all tell someone that they needed to get an abortion, or even how he described it as his church?
Well,
I thought, you know, well, that is so wrong.
You know, Cherry, the Bible says choose life. That when we have a choice between life and death, we choose life. And Christian churches would, of course, counsel, they should anyway, counsel with the woman. And we're not here to judge, we're here to restore. That's why Jesus came, was to restore us. And that's basically what should have happened to her. We're very, very sorry that she had to suffer through that experience.
Yeah. And I also was wanting to comment on how they were saying, how you're talking about the women being sealed to these husbands, and, you know, that's just wrong. You know, when you die, and how they say you're being sealed, and you...
Well, God said thou shalt not commit adultery. That's for man and woman alike. And polygamy flies in the face of that command.
I just wanted to...
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add a comment so we don't lose the thrust of what, you know, my research is about, but that is specifically that the LDS Church is underestimating or not making it known just how important polygamy is as far as its afterworld beliefs, current beliefs. You have so many records, polygamous records of polygamous unions in the LDS system, and polygamous unions being performed for dead people.
Right.
And you've got a huge polygamous network that's being created for dead people. And in the next program, that I will be on, we will be looking at other people besides early Mormons and Mormon fundamentalists who've been sealed to multiple spouses.
Who are still polygamists,
But you have this distancing from polygamy, seemingly, and yet behind the scenes, behind closed temple doors, you have polygamy.
And that's the secrecy that we're talking, that Sherry was talking about. Is that right, Sherry?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we thank you for your call, and we do appreciate what you've told us tonight.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, line one. Well, let's see, line three, Trish in Salt Lake City. Hello, Trish.
Hello.
Hello, you're on the air.
Hi. My question is, all this temple work that the Mormons do, I mean, does it really matter? Is there anything in the Bible? In my mind, I've got some scripture that says, you know, if it's what's done on earth will be done in heaven. Is there any reason to worry that these things are being done, or is it just...
They're all in vain. Every single thing they're doing is in vain. The verse that you mentioned there, what's done on earth is done in heaven, is totally not the context at all. Read the context of that passage. It's not temple sealing, it's not temple marriage, it's not polygamy, has nothing to do whatsoever with marriage at all.
Or any ordinances that they do on earth, right?
Right, absolutely right.
Yes, there's nothing to worry about. However, I'm a great believer that people should be respected for who and what they were.
Good point.
And they should be left alone, and their memory should not be tampered with. And this religious revisionism that Mormons are doing is genealogically, to me, it is very wrong. We have this huge genealogical facility here in Salt Lake City, one of the best in the world, the Family History Library, and yet what is the purpose for this massive collection of names?
Dead works.
The purpose is dead works.
You know, I just want to say that I think
probably the worst thing about all this genealogy, is that it's taken the focus away from Jesus Christ.
Totally away from the main thing,
and
right.
I think that's why it's an instrument of the devil, because we're not focused on loving others and being saved through Christ. They're spending all this time and energy focused on
good
dead
point.
people.
Absolutely good point.
Anyway, thanks for your information.
Thank you, Trish. Good night. Okay, Amanda in Provo. Hello, Amanda.
Yes.
Yes, you're on the air.
Well, I'd just like to say hello. I kind of had a question on where you got your information.
Can you be specific about information? You're talking about the ordinance information?
I'm actually a member of the LDS Church, and some of the things just...
Hello? Is she still there?
Hello, Amanda? She either hung up or got disconnected somehow.
Let me answer that question really briefly.
Please do.
The information was gathered from multiple databases because the LDS Church has different programs, and it improves its programs. It comes out with new programs. It used to have the International Genealogical Index. That was a database of ordinance records mainly for mostly dead people, but not only dead people. Then it upgraded to New Family Search, and the International Genealogical Index has been online since May 1999. It's now frozen, and New Family Search is the current program. So I have to protect my Mormon sources as far as confidentiality goes, as far as accessing information. But the majority of the information I've got from New Family Search, but when I started doing the research on the Mormon fundamentalists over a year ago, most of the information was taken from the International Genealogical Index. New Family Search wasn't fully released then. So, and also there's an old database on CD-ROM available at most family history centers of the IGI, and some of the records were taken from there, like the David William Jeffs records. So I have multiple files, and they've taken from numerous databases.
Okay, I hope that answers Amanda's questions, even though she didn't get through. Very quickly, I come across this remark on the internet from, I believe it was a woman who said this, and it fits so much into what we're talking about. I thought I'd quickly mention it. She's talking about another issue with the Mormon Church, but she said, I think it's really interesting that the Mormons are into genealogy, but they're not so much into history. She said if they bothered to dig around the history of Joseph Smith's past, they would discover that he was a charlatan, a con man from New England. It seems like that would cast a dark shadow on his declarations of being a prophet. No amount of mainstreaming Mormon activities can get me past the serious duck quacking of these beliefs and lack of historical vetting. And I thought about that, and that is so true. They're into this genealogy, so huge. But you ask a Mormon to go out and check their history, their unsanitized history, and they refuse to do it. They won't check their history.
What concerns me about Joseph Smith is his character, and he was not exactly truthful about his involvement in polygamy, and also the version of the angel with the sword threatening him. And by the way, talking about that in the polygamy revelation involving Emma Smith, I wanted to bring this point up. Doctrine and Covenants, section 132 on polygamy states, and I command mine handmaid Emma Smith to abide and cleave unto my servant Joseph and to none else. So how come Emma has 3 spouses? Joseph Smith and these revelations so much information there that doesn't gel.
Right.
And why don't people check that?
Why don't they check
Why
it
don't
out?
they? That's just one example.
That's right.
But Joseph's history, the angel, the coercive angel, saying you must do this or else, and then he uses that as a reason to seduce all these women. I mean, and yet so many Mormons will say, well, it was inspired. God had the patriarchs of old with plural, not with plural wives, with many wives, and it's like, and what Joseph
Totally
did was
different.
okay,
Totally
but they
different.
don't sit down and think what it means about somebody having intimate relations with so many women.
That's absolutely right. And also remember Galatians chapter 1 says, if an angel from heaven comes down and tells you a different gospel, and that's a different gospel because Joseph Smith said, you live it or you be damned. That's what he said. That's what Brigham Young taught. That's what they all taught. So anyway, we're coming towards the close of our show. We've got 2 calls that we didn't quite get to. I'm sorry, Elizabeth and Mike. Please email us or call in. And Helen, thank you so much for coming tonight.
My pleasure.
And I'd like to close by saying in the Old Testament that God had designated one temple as the only place that he would put the authority of his name. One temple only in one place, and that was Jerusalem. And there was only one high priest, and he mediated the blood sacrifices for the people's sins in that one temple. And of course that was fulfilled by Jesus Christ when he died on the cross for the sins of the world. That temple was never used for marriages, never used for baptisms of the dead or secret oaths and rituals, but for sacrifices. Now Jesus said in John chapter 2 verse 21 that his body was the temple. And in Acts chapter 17 verse 24, God says he does not dwell in temples built by human hands. And Acts chapter 4 verse 48 says the Most High does not live in houses made by men. And in Colossians it tells us that the fullness of the Godhead lived in the person of Jesus Christ. That's the Trinity. And of course we can't leave out the scripture that tells us that Jesus was God, Emmanuel, God with us. Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of the Old Testament temple where mediation and sacrifice met and were fulfilled once and for all. Now, finally, I have another question that I would like to ask. Why does this culture find it so reprehensible to just trust in Jesus Christ alone? We hear them yelling, well, the church is in his name. It isn't his church if you're doing the works. His true church is built upon his works alone, not by your works. We want to thank, he rejects everything else. Thanks again, Helen. We'll be back in 2 weeks as we discuss some more of the shocking information that she's found out. Thank you for coming tonight. We'll see you next week. Good night.